You're listening to Puma Podcast.
It speaks volume on what China feels about the current administration's policy towards China to the point that they would actually welcome Duterte to come in.
On July 17, 2023, former President Duterte met Xi Jinping in Beijing. The highly unusual meeting took the public by surprise, and until now, the details remain scarce. So in this episode, we sit down with an analyst steeped in Chinese politics to ask, what does it all mean? Hi, I'm Bella Perez Rubio, Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka News.
Hi, I'm John Robert Go. I'm an associate professor of political science at UP Diliman. I do research on Chinese domestic politics.
Jan Robert earned his doctorate in political theory at the Central China Normal University in Wuhan. He also sits on the board of directors of the Philippine Association for Chinese Studies.
I learned that from my network and friends who have been really paying close attention to whatever is happening in China. Well, the people knew that Duterte was going to China, but they were also surprised that he was able to meet Xi Jinping. So, kumbaga, if we were looking at the itinerary, it wasn't very clear that he would have that chance to talk to Xi Jinping.
Who initiated the meeting remains unclear. In fact, the Department of Foreign Affairs told reporters that it did not have any information on the visit. Here's what we know from China's foreign ministry. Duterte and Xi met at the Diaoyutai State Guest House in Beijing. Duterte was accompanied by his former executive secretary, Salvador Medialdea. State Councilor Wang Yi and other Chinese foreign affairs officials were also there. Jan Robert told me that the Diaoyutai State Guest House is the usual venue for receiving foreign visitors. He added that Diaoyutai literally means fishing platform and that the site used to be a fishing spot for a former Chinese emperor. Coincidentally, Diaoyutai is also the Taiwanese name assigned to a group of disputed islands in the East China Sea. China calls them Diaoyu, while the Japanese refer to them as the Senkaku Islands.
When I received that information, the first question in my mind was why? Why would he do that and why would he go there? But at the same time, why did Xi Jinping agree to meet with Duterte?
The Chinese Foreign Ministry in a statement said Xi lauded Duterte for improving Manila's relations with Beijing. Xi also quote-unquote expressed the hope that Mr. Duterte will continue to play an important role in the friendly cooperation between the two countries.
Of course, Duterte under his presidency had a very, very friendly relations with China. And basically that is the motivation. In fact, if you read the message of Xi Jinping, this is my reading of the statement. He was more or less banking on Duterte to ensure that the relationship between Philippines and China will not wane and will improve further. So whatever has been started during the Duterte presidency, China is hoping that Marcos will not put them aside, but rather continue whatever has been started. And therefore, the presence of Duterte was very key there.
And while in the Philippines, reactions to the visit are mixed and developing.
But if you read the Chinese media, they're very happy that Duterte was able to visit China. Yeah, it was well received. It was well received because it's an indicator of a continuing friendship. China really gives premium on the symbols, on the meanings of every action that is being taken. And they want to send a clear message that they might not be satisfied with how the existing relationship is going. And therefore, they're pulling their cards to show that or to remind the current administration that, hey, the previous one's fine. Then maybe you should think of really improving the relations. Don't put whatever has been begun into waste.
What they're saying is, we liked it better before.
That it's a recognition that we probably prefer the policies of the previous administration. That could be one way of saying it. And that giving Duterte access to Xi Jinping is indicative of how important China is placing on Duterte's role.
We get into what this all means for President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. after a quick break. On July 18, President Marcos Jr. was asked about Duterte and Xi's meeting, as the media questioned him on the sidelines of a social welfare development event in Manila. Standing next to him was Vice President Sara Duterte, the former president's daughter.
Former President Rodrigo Duterte had a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping sa Beijing the other day. May imprimatur po ba ninyo ito? May mas po ba ito?
Hindi naman kailangan. Alam ko naman na pupunta siya. At magkaibigan sila, magkakilala sila. So, I hope that napag-usapan nila yung mga issue na ngayon, yung mga nakikita natin, yung mga shadowing, all of these things that we're seeing now.
Marcos was referring there to China's aggressive behavior in the West Philippine Sea.
I hope na napag-usapan nila para naman magkaroon tayo ng progress. Kasi yun naman talagang hapon natin. Patuloy ang pag-uusap. Kaya I welcome any new lines of communication.
Well, we can receive it two ways, like take it as it is, like, okay, you know it, and you were hoping things were going fine. The other way to take it is that he was blindsided about, so they were just probably bluffing that, oh, we also know it, and we are aware of what's happening, but actually, probably they're not, because it would be easier to bluff than to admit, because it would be reflective also of his presidency, that a former president is doing backdoor channeling and negotiations without his knowledge.
But if this unusual meeting was about sending a message to President Marcos that they preferred the previous administration's policy, how should that message be received?
Well, should they give in to the pressures of another country? At the end of the day, it's always the president's decision, of course, with advice from the Department of Foreign Affairs. These are seasoned diplomats, no, telling you what to do. If Marcos really favors the US, then he has to be very clear about it and not send mixed signals, because it's also very difficult. Otherwise, other countries will also misinterpret whatever is happening. And of course, I think the interpretation now is he's really moving to favor the US a lot. They have to be very clear with their policies now. Otherwise, the other country would continue to exert pressure, and that could even spell more danger than good.
It seems pretty clear that President Marcos is trying to tread a fine line, right? It's better for him to be clear about his preferences. But some people also say that that might be risky if he doesn't balance this well. So what do you think about that? Is it really better for him to make his preferences known, or is it good that he's being a bit tight-lipped and vague?
But you cannot have your cake and eat it too. There are clear manifestations that we have a strong relationship with the US, like the Mutual Defense Treaty and all of these agreements that we have. Those would be the basis of our relationship with the US. I think there's nothing to be scared by saying, oh, we have all of these agreements with them. Okay? And then we all have to honor these agreements sooner or later. So in that sense, no, probably it's good to try to balance, but you also don't balance it for the sake of balancing it. But rather, you try to balance, but recognize that there are already existing biases. You cannot be truly neutral in the larger scale of things.
Here's UP Diliman political analyst Jan Robert Go with the final word.
But, you know, a former president is a former president. So, basically, whatever Duterte says now, it would not really have any impact on policy. Right? Unless, of course, at a more personal level, Marcos would heed whatever Duterte would say. But I suppose Marcos as a president has his own biases in policy making. And therefore, whatever influence Duterte would exert, then it could just be any other piece of advice that he can take from anyone else.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. This episode was edited by Pedoy Blanco. Our executive producer is Jill Caro, and our senior news editor is Veronica Uy. If you want to learn more about foreign policy under the Marcos administration, check out our episode from last week that also covered the president's choice not to mention the West Philippine Sea in his State of the Nation address. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you like this episode, please take the time to click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for listening.